All right, everyone. Well, I think we should all welcome back Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak to the 1313s.
Very happy to meet you. Thank you.
So this evening, can you hear me all? Yeah?
You know, Bernard is the only person who takes me seriously at this university. He's the only one who asks me to speak. It is true.
All right. I'm glad about that.
I am too. You have judgment.
All right. Yes. So, so this evening we are at the locus classicus of the inversions of Hegel. We are face to face with the key texts that really represent the namesake of this year's entire seminar, Inversions of Hegel, 1313. I mean, it's that famous sentence in our first readings, deeply contested and interpreted in various many ways for 150 years. But nevertheless, that sentence in the first readings that Gayatri Spivak provided for us in this extraordinary reader that Gayatri put together, and we're putting it online. It's a work in progress, but we've almost got it reduced because it's a huge PDF. But we've almost got it reduced to size, and it will be online with all the right pages. But it's that famous sentence from Marx, from the postface to the second edition of Capital, Volume 1, that you all know so well, written in 1873, where he writes, with Hegel, the dialectic is standing on its head. It must be inverted in order to discover the rational kernel within the mystical shell. So, of course, it's those words, in a way, that are motivating this year's long series and giving it its title, Inversions of Hegel, 1313. The last week, we explored with Cornel West how Nietzsche confronted and did something to Hegel on history. This week, with Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, we turn to Marx, what he did, and to the relationship between Marx and Hegel. How today to read Marx and Hegel? It's a fraught question. What do those key words mean? Of course, that's been a source of contestation now for 150 years, as these other sentences sprinkled in Marx's text and letters, like his letter to Engels on January 14, 1858, where he writes, as far as the method, he's writing about the Grundrisse, as far as the method of the Grundrisse goes, the fact of having leafed through once again, by mere accident, Hegel's logic rendered me a great service. And what does that mean? What is that service? What is that debt? And what can we learn from it for our own critical work? What did Marx do with Hegel, or on Hegel, or to Hegel? How did it shape his theory and practice, and what can we learn from it? These are philosophical questions, these are philological questions, they're economic questions, they're comparative literature and society questions. They are questions for us reading, some of us, in English or in other languages, in translation. And they call, of course, for a close reading of these texts in English and in their original German. They call for a unique comparative gaze that few people on earth have mastered as well as Gayatri Spivak. I really think that there's no one better on earth to help us do this work that we're going to do tonight. You can feel it, you can see it in the reader itself that Gayatri created, with the help, of course, of Sam Lim Kinberg and Surya Parekh and
also
Ricardo
Diva Gupta, who's sitting there. She's helped.
Diva Gupta as well, and Ricardo Lumbera, who helped put all of this in one reader. And in some emails, Professor Spivak had proposed to develop in your remarks a new theory of influence, which sounds absolutely fascinating given all of these paired readings. And so I think that we are in for an intellectual treat tonight. Few scholars have worked more productively on the relationship between Marx and other critical thinkers, whether it's Du Bois or Derrida or Hegel this evening. As you know, of course, Gayatri Spivak joins us as the university professor here at Columbia University, founding member of the Institute for Comparative and Literature and Society, the author of many books, including Can the Subaltern Speak?, A Critique of Post-Colonial Reason, Death of a Discipline, and many others. And I think this year we're actually celebrating the 50th year of the Grammatology.
I just saw the cover. Fantastic.
Yeah? Okay, excellent. 50th year of Gayatri's edition of Jacques Derrida's of
And
Grammatology.
really, I've done as much to have a really good final translation, because I'm 84. There's not going to be another edition. I've really
We're waiting for the
hard.
60th anniversary edition.
Yes, 94.
And of course, Gayatri is also an activist involved in rural education, feminist and ecological social movements, and has been an activist since forever.
And in 1957, when Amlandat took us on electoral education to the villages. Amlandat, some of you here might know his name. But so that's when it began.
It's amazing. And of course, most importantly, a great colleague and interlocutory. So thank you for joining us, Gayatri. And we are all ears, and we're going to be following along with all the texts. And this is going to be a working seminar. Okay, this is not a kind of a big presentation seminar. It's a working seminar. So I hope you've all brought your books and your readers, and as much as you can. If you have a laptop here, you can go to the website for this evening, and there are links to the readings on there, okay? So you go to Hegel 1313, and then you go to the 313 tab, and you'll get to this evening, and then on there you will find the readings, and they're divided up right now by text. So you can go to the 18th of Brumaire, or you can go to Capital 1 or Capital 3 or the Phenomenology, okay? Right now they're by text. Soon they will be with the reader itself, which is paginated, but it's a work in progress. All right, well, wait a minute.
Okay. Thank you. Don't expect too much, okay? Because I'm really not in control of this topic. I've been working at this for a very, very long time. But the way people, you can hear me in the back? Yes. The way people like me, people in the humanities work, and especially phenomenologically inclined, they're not really ready to give the final version at any point. And I must say that this is a more serious statement than the usual kind of modest stuff that people say when they've been given a very generous introduction. I mean, I think Bernard went a little overboard, but that's okay, you know. But you must realize that the fact that I'm not in control of the topic is part of what I do. So it's not, I'm always looking forward to control, but only looking forward, you know. And in one of the passages that I've given you, Hegel writes that this is how the ultra-revolutionaries talk. And that's a remark that Hegel would say. Of course, I wouldn't exist for Hegel being colored and a woman. But that's all right. I mean, I can change myself. Hegel couldn't. But that's, we are going to forget that part. Okay. So, I mean, there is this book that is just out. Roz, you mentioned it yesterday. I do know of its existence, on Kojev, where they talk about the phenomenology as a Bildungsroman, you know, as a, what's it called in English, Bildungsroman? Everybody knows that word.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not correct. The Bildungsroman part of the phenomenology is a kind of normative deviation that's built into the phenomenology. This is a very beautifully written text, so that is a mistake that the text asks for, but that's not the text. So that to an extent, reading this, to read it as a Bildungsroman is a mistake. But I shouldn't begin there because that's beginning in the middle. What I wanted to begin with was this inversion, umstülpen, overturn, which is very different from inversion. Inversion is polite. It's a nice Latinate English word. Umstülpen is quite different. It's a very, so this is why I'm a comparative literature person, and I respect people's mother tongue. And I also am sorry to say that the English translations don't catch Marx's spirit. Don't catch Marx's spirit. In July, Anil Acharya, the editor of Anushtup, asked me to teach some Marx in Calcutta in Bengali, which was fine. I teach in Bengali all over the place. But there too, I took the German because it's necessary. And as I was saying in class the other day, we can't learn all the languages of the world. But we should realize that that's a problem we have as human beings, rather than the English translation is a convenience beyond which we will not go. If there is this difference, I'm a humanities teacher, so the epistemological differences matter a great deal to me. That's all we do. That's all we do, you know. Those who can do. Those who can do more, teach. So we produce the doers. So to an extent, that's, and Hegel was a classroom teacher, not Marx. And so the construction of collectivities through classroom teaching is very different from union organizing. It's very different from vanguardism. So that to an extent, Hegel was absolutely devoted to doing it for his students, so that the phenomenology as it comes out in the encyclopedia volumes, what are they? They are somehow rewriting. I mean, he was, the phenomenology is an early book, right? But he was revising the phenomenology at the time of his death. And what was his revisions worth? The revision, so humanize Hegel a bit. You're talking, there isn't another person from the humanities on your list, is there? No. You can't call it qualitative sociology's humanities.
Is Bruno the dean?
No. He may be the dean of the humanities, but that's not being in the humanities.
Okay, all right.
But anyway, so, and I will never be a dean of the humanities. No one would ever think of making me a senior administrator. But the real question is why? Is it a positive or a negative? Both positive and negative. Let's get back to Hegel. So what was he doing? Why was he revising? Because he wanted his students not to go into saying, oh, the subject is best. Okay, he was trying to make it possible for his students to understand that the subject was not capable of accessing the Geist. The Geist should not be, and that's the speculation passage. So this is a classroom teacher. Why was he interested in this? Because his project, and that's one good thing that Pincard says. I don't like Pincard's translation, but he certainly loves Hegel. Because the phenomenology was also a text to change the world. So that whatever Marx might say, it was a text where, and why was it so? Why was it so? It wasn't like Hegel sat down and said, I'm going to change the world. We are talking about a text that's been around. Why was it so? Because this is the time when The vulgar folks are beginning to develop possessive individualism. And certainly both, and this is why the European tradition has been able to give us such powerful critiques of capitalism, even when the folks themselves, their own point of view, might not have been exactly reflections of a critique of capitalism. Because there was a very long distance between absolutism and access to democracy in Europe. We didn't have that kind of advantage because of imperialism. So therefore, that was the time when these critiques developed beyond the personalities of these extremely smart individuals. And so from that point of view, what we needed, today we need it even more, was some restraint on the untrammeled confidence of the subject. And that's where Hegel is in the phenomenology, putting a restraint on the subject. And that you won't understand reading in English. You know why? Because of the difference between the two words, Darstellung and Vorstellung. Both of these are translated, represent, present, etc. You lose it completely. The whole text is played out in terms of synonyms, one of which is philosophical and the other colloquial. And this is how you understand, Wissen and Erkennen, recognize, Erinnerung and Gedächtnis, both memory. So therefore, when I say that it's a good idea to perhaps for these great texts to learn the language, I'm not joking. It's a different Hegel that you read if you read Hegel in that way, okay? The whole text is written in the play. Okay, now, what did Lenin say? So, on the one side, as Bernard pointed out, we have Marx saying one must overturn the text. That's an effortful thing to say. And Marx, in fact, umstülpen is one word, umwälzen is another word, which is a bigger kind of overturning, but with less what would I say, less strength, as it were, less force. And then the big word, of course, is Revolution. And he uses that word very, very seldom, hardly ever. So that we're going to look at the 18 Brumaire there and see what he does with Hegel. I must get there because that's a very good example of what Marx does with Hegel. So Marx said that he was, what did he say in that passage? You said, oh yes, there it is, that dog. Okay, what did he say? He said, here and there in the chapter on the theory of value, I coquetted with the mode of expression peculiar to Hegel. The mystification which the dialectic suffers in Hegel's hands by no means prevents him from being the first to present its general forms of motion. So this idea of Bewegung, motion, in Hegel, if you're reading Hegel, it's extremely strong. And in fact, the Bewegung in different Gestalten, in different forms, the subject cannot access. The Bewegung happens beyond the subject's thinking. And that's why I forgot to talk about Vorstellung and Darstellung, very important. The word Vorstellung cannot really be translated properly. Vorstellung is to set before, right? Before. And Darstellung, to set there, is good, correct representation. The subject is incapable of Darstellen any part of this system. No. The subject in even the philosopher, the philosophizing subject, is human after all. In every page, and if we don't get to it, you can recognize the word. In every page you'll see the subject only vorstells. So Vorstellung means in order to begin thinking, you have to do something like a concept. It doesn't catch the concept, but something rough and ready in order to be able to begin. And here, as a result of British empiricism, people will ask you to define right at the beginning of the discussion. That's absolutely pathetic in terms of what we learn in, even to want to define is pathetic, because if you finalize the definition, you have betrayed the phenomenology. Because the phenomenology, after all, is dependent upon what Sartre will call situation. The phenomenology is dependent, and so how does Hegel describe the phenomenology? We can just keep this formula in our head, because I'm not a philosopher. So the formula in Hegel is to turn appearance to experience, to turn Erscheinung to Erfahrung, to turn appearance to, and so in phenomenology, this is why in one of the texts I gave you, Marx says capital is not real. There is no capital. Labor is not real. They appear as social relations. So, and remember in the one text that I gave you in Marx, the wheat that grows from the earth is not real. And it does not appear as exchange, because these are, all of them are forms of appearance, Erscheinungsformen. And they appear as such because each one of us is who we are. So therefore, it's the phenomenological approach, which is not idealism. Because the idea, remember, noumenon. A phenomenon is not a noumenon, apophanestai. It appears into the light. That's where we begin. That's why it's something, it's to want to establish a definition. This is the problem with analytic philosophy. Rawls, Nussbaum, they will say, this is the best theory. Unfortunately, to quote Frederick Douglass, that's when the problem begins. You think you have, this is an activist. Frederick Douglass was not a fool. So what did he say at the time of emancipation? You think you've solved the problem. Now the problem begins. So to an extent, that's the attitude that I'm asking you to put into. That is not close reading. Because close reading is control. It's on the model of cross-examination. See, our entire culture is devoted to controlling the text, whereas the humanities approach is to learn to surrender to the text. And that's how we think about Marx and Marx surrendering to Hegel. I'm sure some of you have been to the Aula Magna at Humboldt. Anyone here? The big hall, yes. And that's where Hegel taught. That's where Marx taught. Unfortunately, Marx was a student, sorry. That's where Marx sat, but not for Hegel. It has been my great good fortune to actually lecture there once, because there were too many people, so they had to move to the Great Hall. And I knew, of course, the history of the room. My hands were shaking. I held my hands under the desk, so people couldn't see that to be talking there, I just couldn't bear it. So therefore, the idea of Hegel as a classroom teacher is something you keep in mind, because this is what we're looking at today is a teaching problem. Is a teaching problem. How was this critique of capitalism going to become active in the readers of Capital? It's a teaching problem. So, and in his Conspectus of Hegel's Science of Logic, as you know, this is one of the passages I gave you, Lenin urged Marxists to study Hegel's logic, famously stating, now Arkady Plotnitsky has actually given me the literal translation of the Russian and included the second sentence, which Arkady told me that in his youth, And also now, this was an extremely important sentence. That this is not just something you throw away. And what did he say? It is impossible completely to understand Marx's Capital, and especially its first chapter, without having thoroughly studied and understood the whole of Hegel's logic. And then his next sentence was, and this is why no one, I see that it's not here, this is why no one has been able to, no philosopher has been able to understand Marx so far. That's what actually, that's the sentence that Arkady put in because he couldn't imagine the quote to exist without it. Now that attitude is a wrong attitude. That no one else has understood Marx except me, because I have fully understood. This is one of the secrets of the failure of the Soviet Union. This idea of following Marx like a blueprint, that's not how Marx wrote. So therefore, when Badiou and Zizek construct a kind of Saint Lenin these days, I mean, of course, Lenin is our brother. He was a wonderful man, Vladimir Ilyich, but he was no saint, and he made a mistake. They were upper-class people. I mean, Trotsky, of course, was from the nobility. They were upper-class, very well-educated bourgeois people, not Stalin. Stalin was the son of a slave, right? It was, I mean, his father was born a serf. It was during during Stalin's childhood that serfdom was supposedly became illegal. Stalin grew up in a mud thing and went to the horrible so-called seminar where serfs' children went. And none of the Lenin, Trotsky, Kamenev, they never thought of the fact that class production, Stalin's class production, was completely different from theirs. And so, of course, he worked like a dog. And of course, they gave him every task because he was a slave son, and these were gentlemen. And so they really showed there that, and so given the way in which serfs had been treated millennially in Russia, he was not hesitant to kill to make the country better in his view. So this particular situation, to ignore class production as they were acting, this is also something which, I mean, they were wonderful people. They didn't want to have an army, remember. That was a wonderful thing. But this attitude that you read the science of logic, and then you will thoroughly read science of logic, then you will understand Marx, and then the next sentence, and therefore no Marxist philosophers have been able to understand Marx at all until today. That attitude is also incorrect. So therefore, what we would suggest, paid humanities teachers would suggest, is what Gramsci suggested. Gramsci, in fact, took the master-slave dialectic and turned it into master-disciple. And Gramsci suggested that in order to produce the subaltern intellectual, the new intellectual had to go to the areas, the subaltern environment, and the new intellectual was a disciple. And who was his master? The subaltern's environment. Gramsci was not a stupid romantic to say, oh, the subaltern knows everything. If the subaltern knows everything, then subalternization is not a historical crime. Then let us just behave that way. I should know. I belong to the caste system. Let's just behave that. That's the best instrument of subalternization that's been invented in the world so far, the caste system. So let's just go on doing it. They know everything anyway, what they should want. So that's not what Gramsci was suggesting. In order to produce the subaltern intellectual, the subaltern's environment becomes the master, and the intellectual is the disciple. Now, so therefore, that kind of, you learn to learn from below, from the environment, how to approach the subaltern whom you have yourself screwed. So to an extent, this idea of how to, and as you know, I'm sure many of you have read Rostowski's The Making of Marxist Capital. This is also what Marx's own goal was. The implied reader is the working person, the implied reader of Capital, Volume 1. That's the only Capital that he published. And so, therefore, supposedly, this is also an instrument of education. And so, therefore, we would, as a teacher of the humanities, I would say that the problem in the relationship between Hegel and Marx is a problem of teaching as epistemological transformation. I learned to recognize that from Gramsci. Gramsci writes about Marx's critique of Hegel's introduction, that that from that text you can see that Marx's point of view is not psychological, and Marx's point of view is not even political, but what it is epistemological, to change people's minds, to change, but Marx didn't know how to change people's minds. He was not a teacher. He wanted to change the worker's self-concept epistemologically from victim of capitalism to agent of production. But in order, and then he presumed that if, having made this change and having quantified labor, that's what he was asking the worker to do, to see labor power, which is a quantification. Having seen this, the worker would then he would want, by consent, to take a little bit of the surplus value for himself and use the rest for social justice. Marx did not know, as a nice 19th century humanist, a gentleman, that he did not know that the human affects are fear, violence, and greed. That you have to, he knew this for the capitalists, but he didn't know that this is a general human thing. So this is the point at which one enters Marx's relationship to Hegel. Marx's relationship to Hegel was what we call being haunted by Hegel. Okay, so what is it to be haunted? It was as if, and we are going to read a passage, I hope, as if a Hegelian page came to him as he was writing and took over his page. This is the relationship between Marx and Hegel. This is the relationship between, and generally what do intellectuals do? They reduce Hegel to principles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they say, well, Marx didn't agree to this, and Marx didn't agree to that, and this is how we should compute Marx's. They throw the text away. But in fact, what we, the humanists, the humanities people, I'm not really a humanist, but the humanities people, not at all. What the humanities people can teach about teaching, and there's Hegel in the same way, is that you don't, in fact, teach anybody anything by just assuming that human beings are good. You don't. And Marx knew this practically when he writes, let's say, the critique of the Gotha program. He knows very well that that is not so. But when he's writing his main texts, his humanism comes through. So let's go back to Lenin's urging. Why is it, and so Marx himself, as he was writing the Grundrisse, said that he had looked at Hegel's logic. But the Grundrisse is not a published text. The Grundrisse is Marx making notes in many languages. The Grundrisse is not the developed Marx, which, and I made you read that, the dual character of value, that is the dual character of labor. The Grundrisse has not yet discovered that capital is stolen surplus value. That's not in Grundrisse yet. The Grundrisse is a fantastic text. It's wonderful to read. But unfortunately, in English, the English translation totally ignores its absolutely multilingual character. It's written in German, French, English, all kinds of languages. And it was not for publication. And so Marx says, I read Hegel's logic. But that was before the passage that we just read. This is the postface to the second edition of Capital, right? So what does Marx do and why is the logic not enough? Because the logic is defined by Hegel as the speculative. And I asked you to read that passage. So you gave me the English of speculative?
Yeah. What page is it in the...
well, anyway, what is...
It's 55.
It's okay, I'm translating. It's 55,
yeah, I think. It's in the preface? Yeah.
It's in the preface. In its being, to be the Begriff, I don't know how they translate it. See, Begriff is concept, right? Begriff, the word Begriff is concept. But Begriff in German has a very strong metaphor in it. And we read concepts as concept metaphors. Okay, so the idea is that I'm not using this text.
I know.
The idea is begreifen, grasp. We have that word. That's the concept. So, what the point is about the subject, that it has to be the concept in its being. The subject cannot grasp the concept. This is totally grasp the Begriff. This is totally there in the phenomenology. The subject can't grasp the concept. It has to be the concept. The subject is a symptom of the Geist. It's an example of it. So he writes, I'm just translating, I don't know how your text translates it, in his being, to be his Begriff. And look at how it sounds, how many Seins there are. In seinem Sein, in his being, to be, sein Begriff, its concept, zu sein. It is that it possesses centrally the logical necessity. Okay.
So here's your translation if you want it. It's
yes, sure.
The Pinkard.
It's much better to read the translation. So where did I begin?
This is 55.
Yes, but where did I begin? Wait a second. To be fixed and enduring. However. No. This is the Anaxagoras. Okay, let me just say. So it is, and so this is contained in logical necessity. So when what is its concept in its being.
Paragraph.
Centrally, it's okay. Let me carry on. It's centrally logical necessity. It consists of logical necessity. So this is the only vernünftige, the rational, reasonable, and the rhythm of the organic everything that is the Wissen, which is, you don't get that in the English at all. There's the contrast between erkennen, which is subjects not strong, and Wissen, which is what happens in the Geist, where the subject is acting out its Begriff. So so the content is concept and essence, but the subject doesn't get there. And this alone is the speculative. Okay, so the speculative is what the subject acts out when it acts out its concept within the knowledge that is the substance of the Geist. This is something, it's difficult to grasp, but this is how Hegel defines the place of the speculative. It is, by the way, comparable to the word maxim in Kant. See, when in this building, I taught a class with Jeremy Waldron, who was also a university professor, on Kant. And he had only read Kant's political writings in English. And he had invited me as an ethno-cultural agenda. And so he's talking about Kant's maxims. He did not know. And I said, Jeremy, let me just put in something here to supplement that how Kant, all of these people have this whole value system of words. How Kant evaluates maxim. It's something just confined to the subject's need. It's not really like a big, wonderful principle. It's in the paragon of the first critique. And the speculative is the same thing. In the phenomenology, Hegel situates the speculative. It's the only thing, speculative necessity, logical, logische Notwendigkeit, logical necessity. It's how the subject acting out the concepts in the wissenschaftlich, knowledge-worthy Geist, the subject can accede to this. So therefore, it's a kind of a limit. It's not the openness to the, and here something you should also notice is that there's a little dash. And Hegel, this is known, Hegel uses these dashes when, in order to show that the philosophical subject writing this book is not able to make a transition here. This is, I'm not suggesting this is not my insight. People who read Hegel, in fact, I have here someone who's in my class, a native German speaker. I was very happy to see that she was also completely aware of this. So this fact, there is a little, so that's the speculative, that's the logic, that's the science of logic. So it certainly is correct and good, but it's not the phenomenology. The phenomenology is what actually acts out the impossibility of the philosopher to access the Geist. Now, why is this to be, what does Marx do with this? Marx takes the Geist, Marx writes a phenomenology of capital. So that Marx, this is why I made you read the Trinity formula. In the Trinity formula, Marx tells us that to think that capital, land, and labor, Trinity, the Holy Trinity, that this is forever essential to describe social formations is a mistake. So this is where Marx is echoing, I think, Hegel's critique of Kant, where he says about Kant, Kant was a very smart guy, and Kant had a very fine intuition, and so therefore he could think phenomenology. Phenomenology as turning appearance to experience, rather than going for the permanent essence. Okay, but Kant, says Hegel, didn't know how to philosophize. So therefore, when he actually wrote this all out in his books, he went to myth and religion, triplicity, Trinity. Everything in Kant is 3 by 3, says Hegel. And this Trinity formula that Marx is writing about, saying that don't think this is the Holy Trinity. See, this is the way in which Hegel haunts Marx. It's not like, does he agree with Hegel in his opinion of Kant? That's not what it is. What it is that we have to, if we're reading Hegel and Kant together, we can see that this is what's happening. And one of the most amusing examples of this, and you can read it yourselves, I don't have to comment on this, is the page on the triangle. See, Marx doesn't need that triangle example at all, but it's an exact echo of a page in Hegel where Hegel also says that in order to get to the Pythagorean formula, you know, the hypotenuse, etc., you have to tear up the triangle and put it in various different spots, etc. Marx doesn't need that metaphor. Why does he put it in there? It's exactly Hegel's page haunting him. You know, this is, anybody who reads the phenomenology and Marx together, and this is how we read on the how Marx's text surrenders to Hegel, even when, because Marx is not going to be following Hegel speculatively, because Marx, in fact, agrees with Hegel's situation, and that's a phenomenological word, if you like, situation of the speculative. So therefore, this reading the science of logic will allow you to turn Marx into a system, and that way madness lies. Because what is happening in the Trinity formula, what Marx is saying to us, is that the capital, ground rent, etc., this is going to be different in terms of different social formations. So therefore, this is something that certainly is, and how do we know this? By going through the concept metaphor of triplicity, of Trinity, because that is that Hegel puts on Kant's shoulders. So that is the way in which one betrays that one is not capable yet of philosophizing phenomenologically, because it's a great risk. You can only act out the begriff, you can't catch it. This is a very difficult thing. And Marx contrasts, Hegel contrasts the mathematical method, which closes everything, with pi. Pi, 22/7, 3 recurring, right? So that 3 stops it. The mathematical method, according to Hegel, stops the phenomenological predicament with pi. Whereas the philosophical method in the phenomenology, it can at least see at a distance the thing blinking like this, saying, oh yes, you can access it, and then shutting off. This is the philosophical method. So therefore, this is the way in which, in Capital Volume 3, which you know that's not a book that Marx wrote, it's Engels putting together passages that he thought did not quite support Capital Volume 1. It's a nice fat book. In Capital Volume 3, when Marx writes The Realm of Freedom, this is what Marx is kind of approaching, that it's a place that is beyond social engineering. The revolutionary cannot approach it. That's another thing. Now listen, I should shut up, so therefore, let's just look at the thing. Look at the, whatchamacallit passage, the Hic Rhodus Sic Salta, what do you say?
Okay.
Where is the, it's in 18 Brumaire? And
yes,
it's,
and in Capital.
And in Capital, okay. So that's, of course, from Hegel. Now, where does Hegel use it? I have...
Philosophy of Right.
I know. Why are you telling me he uses it in the Philosophy of Right? But do I have the passage? Yes, I have it with me. Okay. Now, what I don't... Where is the German? Luca just sent it. I did print it out somewhere.
It's on the handout. Here's the handout.
I don't think so.
Yeah, here.
The passage from Hegel? The passage from Hegel?
This is the Marx.
No, this treatise is Hegel.
Yeah.
Okay. So I hadn't given that passage. So if you have it, that's wonderful. So where is the English? It was the translation. Okay, very good. So the thing is that this is the passage from which Marx takes here Tanze, right? So let's look at Marx's thing in the 18 Brumaire. What is he describing there? What is he describing in in the 18 Brumaire. It's page 150 of the Viking edition, but you have it. Bourgeois revolutions, such as those of the 18th century, storm quickly from success to success. They outdo each other in dramatic effects. Men and things seem set in sparkling diamonds, and each day's spirit is ecstatic. But they are short-lived. They soon reach their apogee, and society has to undergo a long period of regret until it has learned to assimilate soberly the achievement of its period of storm and stress. Proletarian revolutions, however, such as those of the 19th century, constantly engage in self-criticism and in repeated interruptions of their own course. They return to what has apparently already been accomplished in order to begin the task again. With merciless thoroughness, they mock the inadequate, weak, and wretched aspects of their first attempts. They seem to throw their opponents to the ground only to see him draw new strength from the earth and rise again before them, more colossal than ever. They shrink back again and again before the indeterminate immensity of their own goals until the situation is created in which any retreat is impossible, and the conditions themselves cry out, hic rodus, hic salta, here is the rose, dance here, here is the rose, dance, here dance. That's now, Hegel changes this from here is roads, jump here, to here is the rose, dance here. So what is Hegel talking about? He's saying, he's talking about the philosophy, his book, The Philosophy of Right. This treatise, insofar as it contains a political science, is nothing more than an attempt to conceive of and present the state as in itself rational. Remember what Marx had said, that although Hegel was all turned around, it was not impossible for him to chart the true movements of this form. And so that's what Hegel is doing here. Otherwise, Marx wouldn't cite him. So construct as a philosophic writing, it must be again on its guard against constructing a state as it ought to be. On its guard. I mean, look at this. What Marx is describing in 18 Brumaire is the content of a revolution. Nowhere else, because this is the only revolution that he saw, and it was a failure. He writes about its failure all over the place, and this is why he says the Communist Manifesto revolution sections should not be read except as something outdated. But since it was iconic, in the 1872 introduction, Marx and Engels both say, don't consult the first parts of the Communist Revolution because big business has gone too far, and also they failed because they took the state's machinery in and tried to work with it, etc. So that's, and here now, and so here in the 18 Brumaire, it's the only place where he describes content of a revolution. And what is he saying? He's quoting Hegel. Why does he quote Hegel? So that we go back to Hegel, right? And here is the Hegel. So on its guard against constructing a state as it ought to be. Philosophy cannot teach the state what it should be, but only how it, the ethical universe, is to be known. To apprehend what is the task of philosophy, because what is reason. As for the individual, okay, we know that the 11th thesis said we must change the world now, but it certainly doesn't say we ought to create a state as it ought to be. It's very different from saying we are creating a good state. And that's how it failed also. It became state capitalism all over the place. So to apprehend, okay, as for the individual, everyone is a son of his time. So philosophy also is its time apprehended in thoughts. It is just as foolish to fancy that any philosophy can transcend its present world as that an individual could leap out of his time or jump over roads. So, and that's Marx's model for the proletarian revolution. that the proletarian revolution obviously, implicitly, is making false claims. And so the proletarian revolution is failing over and over again, and then is being told, okay, here is Rhodes, jump here. Because the proletarian revolution had claimed that it could jump over a huge gap, which in fact doesn't exist. It couldn't. So read it carefully. Why does he ask you to read Hegel? Not because what you will see, Hegel is bad because he says whatever is right. That's Pope, not Hegel. Whatever is right, and therefore Marx is questioning Hegel. No, Marx has just said in his Dead Dog passage that that great master was able to follow the Bewegungen, even though he was his thing was turned around and it was only focused on mind. So look again. If a theory transgresses its time and builds up a world as it ought to be, it has an existence merely in the unstable element of opinion, doxa, which gives room to every wandering fancy. With little change, the above saying would read, here is the rose, here dance. The barrier which stands between reason as self-conscious spirit and reason as present reality, and does not permit spirit to find satisfaction in reality, is some abstraction which is not free to be conceived, to recognize reason as the rose in the cross of the present. Hegel is talking about Rosicrucianism here, not really Rosicrucianism. The Rosicrucian symbol is printed at the beginning of Philosophy of Right. He is taking that as a metaphor to recognize the reason as the rose in the cross of the present, and to find delight in it is a rational insight which implies reconciliation with reality. This reconciliation philosophy grants to those who have felt the inward demand to conceive clearly, to preserve subjective freedom while present in substantive reality, and yet thought possessing this freedom to stand not upon the particular and contingent, but upon what is and self-completed. Was an und für sich ist zu stehen. That this is so different from this really bogus translation, but nonetheless, there it is. So this particular passage where Hegel is writing about hic rodus, hic saltus, das was ist to begreifen, that is to apprehend what it is to make a concept, is die Aufgabe der Philosophie. This is the task of philosophy, because what is reason, die Vernunft. So to an extent, this idea that the son of time just gets what belongs to time, this is what Marx writes about in 18 Brumaire, that the human being does make its own history, but does not choose the part. That's what Hegel is saying here, that the son of time gets it from time, not from philosophy and the concept. So that particular thing, it's not that Marx thinks exactly as Hegel, but that passage, which you should read carefully, where he tells you what he gets from Hegel, and therefore he uses Hegel. This is one of those passages. Go back to the Philosophy of Right and see how different this is. The preface to the Philosophy of Right, which he wrote after he had written the Philosophy of Right. And you should read the whole thing, and you will see that it is possible for us to think that Marx is actually thinking about Hegel catching the movements in this passage, and therefore he makes you go back to Hegel. Now, another passage that I gave you to read was the passage that ends with the revolutionists think this way. Now, do you have that passage with you?
Is it on the ultra-revolutionaries?
The ultra-revolutionaries.
Yes.
Okay. This, by the way, the Kant's passage about triplicity, I also asked you to read that. Okay, ultra-revolutionaries. You see, and where's the German?
Is that the...
Where's the German?
It should be...
That's the German, right? No.
It should be. Yeah, these are the ultra-revolutionary passages. It should be here.
Okay. You see what here, this passage just before the ultra-revolutionary the speech and action is a very, very interesting passage. Here, you look at how many dashes there are in this passage. There is even a dash in the middle of a sentence. This passage, Hegel is making a mistake here. Intended mistake. Intended mistake is a concept that you can read about online. It's a guy, what's the name of the guy who wrote about the intended mistake? Sammy, remember? No. Okay. His name is something like, if you put intended mistake online, it comes up. Okay, so that's a very interesting, this is what I was saying. Hegel is acting out the fault of the philosopher here. The philosopher is trying to access phenomenology, and then he ends by saying, this is how the ultra-revolutionaries speak, okay? And here, I think, this is what makes Marx say poetry of the future, this passage. So, and in the English, you miss completely these changes. Let's see, this nature of what does now, on the one hand, the nature of scientific method. See, wissenschaftlich is not really scientific. You know, it's an old 19th century translation. I mean, it is true that comparative literature, for example, is called Vergleichende Literaturwissenschaft. Huh? It's a science of comparative literature, right? Because Wissenschaft is also knowledge, correct knowledge. And Wissenschaft, remember, it will end in absolute Wissenschaft, right? Absolute knowledge, the end. So to an extent, that freedom, realm of freedom passage will get you into that area when he says it's beyond all social engineering. So we'll end with that passage, okay? So here, so wissenschaftliche Methode is something that actually can access the way Geist acts. Geist is neither spirit nor mind. Geist is a word, a name. You know, when I think in this series, I did a thing on Foucault, and I emphasized very strongly that Foucault was a nominalist, that the word power, Foucault said, was a name. The trouble is, as Foucault should have known, and Marx also, Hegel also knew, these words, unfortunately, are paleonymic. They have histories. So you can't just say, I'm just choosing this as a name. A name for that which cannot be accessed. Okay, and so what kind of a name is it? Geist. That has a paleonymy, right? And so, but on the other hand, Geist is that place where the subject cannot go. It's a place where something is happening. That's why Lacan says again and again that Hegel is a metonym for psychoanalysis. Because for Lacan, it's easy to say it's the that. You know, Geist is that to an extent. But Hegel can't go there, obviously. So therefore, Geist is not something that you should think about as standing for spirit, and then you make it have colloquial English meaning, called saying spiritual and all of this. No, it's not that. So anyway, so here the wissenschaftliche Methode would be in Geist. If it is, for me, it's Erkenntnis, not Wissenschaft. We can't go to the Wissenschaft. Okay, then it says in the English, partly to be it says, on the one hand, this nature of scientific method is inseparable from the content. No, Teils von dem Inhalte ungetrennt zu sein, to be the nature of this method. But you see, in the English, you feel that Hegel is defining something and describing something. Whereas if you are reading the phenomenology as Hegel teaching you at every step how to read these nouns, it doesn't look like Hegel is defining and describing. It looks like Hegel is staging a phenomenology of the philosopher's ambition to access the Geist. And he will end it by saying that's how the ultra-revolutionaries speak. And that's how he is speaking. Okay, so then determines its rhythm. It determines its rhythm, partly to be separated, uncut from the content, and partly to determine through its rhythm, has wie schon erinnert, as already remembered. You see that Erinnerung is confined to the subject. It's bad memory. I mean, we just recollect and internalize. There is another memory, which is Gedächtnis, which is in the Geist, and in fact, we can also access it through the memory in language. You know, when we learn a language, when we've really learned the language, we are working in terms of the historical memory contained in the language rather than how we are. And in the 18 Brumaire, Marx says that, right? Right in the beginning, that the revolutionary, I asked you to read that passage, that the revolutionary subject is like someone who has learned a foreign language so well that when he actually uses it, he forgets the mother tongue planted in him. It's very badly translated, but this is what he says. So that's the whole business about Gedächtnis, which is also in Hegel, a memory which is somewhere else. Who, where, I don't know. That's why Lacan says this is a metonym of psychoanalysis. You know, and Levinas will say that when the human being becomes human, it gets memory. Although it remembers nothing, the infant has no memory, but it gets memory. It's a memory that is catachrestic. It doesn't remember anything. There you are. But the thing is that Hegel is here using just the ordinary human memory, Erinnerung. And therefore, if we read it in German, we can see it's working in terms of a value system already created by Hegel. You know, you will have many words like that. You know, Verhältnis and Beziehung both mean relationship. But Verhältnis in Kant, in Hegel, means a structurally correct position. And Beziehung is just subjectively the way I relate to you. You know what I mean? So therefore, it's going like this. You know, I won't read the whole thing constantly with dashes. You will find again and again words that, you see, Darstellung, speculative philosophy, its own Darstellung, that is in the wissenschaftlich thing. But generally, in the phenomenology, you can't the subject can't do a Darstellung. The subject can only do Vorstellungen. So then you can actually read the whole German in that way, seeing that with all those dashes, etc., that he is actually doing something that is, strictly speaking, impossible to do in terms of the phenomenology, and he ends it then also, and it's so wie bei der beifallgebenden Annahme. How was it? Just as in those cases where the unfamiliar is greeted with applause, no, the accidentally given is greeted with applause. The reaction is of the same sort. This Unbekannten, Annahme is unknown. The reaction is of the same sort as what in another sphere, the ultra-revolutionary speech and action was. Okay, so therefore, this paragraph I asked you to read because the idea that Marx turns over in the 18 Brumaire the content of the revolution of the 19th century to the future, poetry of the future. It will take its content from the poetry of the future. That relates to what is laid out in this paragraph. Because, again, this is the ultra-revolutionary talk. And so this is something that we should keep in mind. Now, what did I say I would end with? Realm of freedom, yes. Thank you. Realm of freedom is capital 3. And that is where, in fact, Marx again shows to us that there is something that we cannot exceed. And that's 959 or something, isn't it? Is it 959? $9.55, no. 959, there. Okay, so the real wealth of society and the possibility of a constant expansion of its reproduction process.
So hold on, this is volume 3, page 959?
958. The real wealth of, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the bottom. The real wealth of society and the possibility of a constant expansion of its reproduction process does not depend on the length of surplus labor, but rather on its productivity and on the more or less plentiful conditions of production in which it is performed. On this page, Marx is talking about good capitalism, something like welfare state socialism, okay? And so is this greater on its productivity and on the more or less plentiful conditions of production, that's technology, right? It's relative surplus value, not absolute. Absolute is make the worker work more. Okay. The realm of freedom really begins only where labor determined by necessity and external expediency ends. It lies by its very nature beyond the sphere of material production proper. Just as the savage must wrestle with nature to satisfy his needs, to maintain and reproduce his life, so must civilized man, and he must do so in all forms of society and under all possible modes of production. This realm of natural necessity, rather than labor determined by necessity, this realm of natural necessity expands with his development because his needs do too. You can see that Marx is talking about good capitalism here, because this is very much what liberal capitalists would say today. His needs do too, but the productive forces to satisfy these expand at the same time. Freedom in this sphere can consist only in this, that socialized man, Freigesellschaftete, social meaning working in a quantified way, abstract average, the socialized man, the associated producers, Produzenten, associated again in the case of the producers who know that labor power is like a stream of quantified labor. That's the only way in which capital can buy labor. It's not individual labors. That's in your commodity chapter, very important, capital 1. This is not capital 3. So that's not, such producers govern the human metabolism with nature, Stoffwechsel with nature, stuff exchange, because in capital 1, Marx will show that exchange exists even between man and nature. It's not, because romantic anti-capitalism says use value good, exchange value bad. That's really not a very Marxist way of thinking. So it's bringing it under their collective control instead of being dominated by it as a blind power. All of this we can reread in a way that would make it suitable for today's predicament, but that's not what we're doing here. We're talking about Marx and Hegel. accomplishing it with the least expenditure of energy and in conditions most worthy and appropriate for their human nature. But this always remains a realm of necessity. So there was first the necessity of labor, realm of necessity. Then natural necessity. Even that is also a realm of necessity. The true realm of freedom, the development of human powers as an end in itself, begins beyond it, though it can only flourish with this realm of necessity as its basis. The reduction of the working day is the basic prerequisite, the Grundbedingung. What Marx does is say that in what we can do to, so in Hegel, it's the speculative, talking about doing. In Hegel, I read the passage with you, that when the subject is in some way relating by being the Begriff of itself, then it's logical necessity, and that's the only way that it can relate to the rational, the vernünftig. In Marx, here is the kernel of the doing. In Marx, it is the reduction of the working day. And what is the reduction of the working day? Marx and Engels doesn't know it, but who knows it? Rosa Luxemburg knows it. It's anarchism. Because Marx and Engels don't like anarchism because of Bakunin. Right? They fought with Bakunin and so on. But Rosa Luxemburg, in her mass strike, when she's talking about the 1906 revolution, really, which was started in Baku, and the first revolution, she's talking about anarchism, and she's saying that Marx and Engels were not really right about anarchism. And one would, if I were to, and and so all of these strikes, 1906, beginning really from 1892, she says in the mass strike how that happened. All of them were about the reduction of the working day. That's what it was. And so, to an extent, one can see how here in this passage, how Hegel comes to him, but the idea of doing is different. For Hegel, it's a speculative. And for Marx, it's that little action in which way the subject can access that realm of freedom that is beyond even natural necessity. And so you see, in Hegel, the first page of Anthropology, I think I made you read it, that the soul, the spirit is as truth in nature. That's the first celebrated sentence, absolutely untranslatable, because geworden doesn't really have a proper, it's not coming to being and become, etc., etc. It doesn't really have a proper translation. It's a wonderful sentence. And Hegel defines something called soul. What is soul in the Anthropology? The soul is not yet Geist. Okay? So that's, again, it's a name. It's not like you can't just use it and it has a palyonymy. If we really were having a class that would come again next week, etc., we could discuss this. So the soul is a name of something in the subject that's not yet Geist. Always not yet Geist. The subject is always not yet Geist, right? And so that's called the soul. And so that's why I wanted you to read The Beautiful Soul, because that is how the subject acts philosophically, and the beautiful soul are the people who are totally focused on the self. Okay? Don't forget, Hegel shared his dorm room with Hölderlin and Schelling. Just think, these three shared a dorm room. Jesus wept. But anyway, so therefore, in this, that's the kind of thing, Novalis and so on, that's the kind of thing he's describing. The beautiful soul just disappears. Just disappears. gets divided and disappears, but because the soul is not yet Geist. Okay, so on the other hand, for Marx, this beautiful soul is historical. Marx says that human labor, he divides it into two. And so this is the last bit is about doing, right? One doing was the working day. This is another doing. So labor is zuerst. Inside it's just as dual in the translation. Zuerst is a much stronger word. It's an unusual word. Schlacht is battle. So inside labor, there are two things battling. The centrifugal is the private, but the centripetal, which is what the worker must learn to do. See, this is the beautiful soul is Marx pays no attention. For him, the beautiful soul can go to hell. He notices that the soul is the labor is divided, because and there he says that what the worker has to know is that the centripetal part, the non-private part, that's the one that he must, that's homeopathy, fight poison with poison. I mean, this very romantic stuff in the 1844 manuscripts, which I couldn't touch, that's not living labor and dead labor, that he revises. It's quantified labor is not dead labor. It's the instrument to fight capitalism with, right? And so that's what the commodity section tells the worker. Please learn to deny your private labor, private things. That's just the beautiful soul stuff. You go into this abstract average, and they can never know it. The abstract average can't be known. The average subject, after all, is a result of addition and division. Doesn't exist. But nonetheless, so that's where we've taken the soul. But that's where Marx says, and this you don't find in the Grundrisse. That's where Marx says, this is my Springpunkt. This is the thing with which you can do the entire fight against capitalism. Not with any revolution or anything. Marx doesn't use that. Remember, some of us defined capitalism simply as collective consent to cooperative behavior. So, I mean, not capitalism, I mean communism. So, therefore, I mean, I know it's a bit of a joke, we're smiling, but it's not a joke. And so, to an extent, that's also something that you must keep in mind, that in order to find these things, and you must yourselves find these passages, and if you learn a bit of German, you will do it even better. You must find these passages, but that's the relationship, you know, where the action moments come out of these beautiful moments where Marx acknowledges Hegel's power to look at the proper movements of philosophy, even though he needs to be umstört. Now, I really can't go anywhere else now, but I mean, it would be very nice to also read the economic and philosophical manuscripts, but I can't do it now. But what you have to remember is the phenomenology is not a chronology. That's why it's not a Bildungsroman. If the phenomenology were a chronology, what is it? We don't know. Hegel doesn't know either. However, it is not like it began in necessity and it will end in absolute knowledge. Unfortunately, that chronology is constantly fighting to be the meaning. Okay? So maybe it is the meaning, who knows? But so if it were the meaning, what would it be? It would be the Erscheinungsform for a philosopher like Hegel. That's all he can do. He's a son of his time. Okay? So in fact, the phenomenology can be just like a smorgasbord of different Erscheinungsformen. and relating to different kinds of socially formed subjects. And so the absolute knowledge stuff undermines everything there. But the rest of it, so one thing I will say, which doesn't relate to anything that we read today, but I just finished that review of Malabou's book on the effacement of pleasure last night. So I just, it comes out of there. She shows everyone, like Simone de Beauvoir, like Dolce, like Lonzi, Italian-German feminists, Lucy Garay, everyone, and of course we know Fanon did it too, everyone relating to the master-slave dialectic. So then master-slave dialectic, one would say, is that phenomenological Erscheinungsform which most affects liberated intellectuals. See what I mean? So the subject appropriate to the master-slave dialectic is Garay and Beauvoir and Fanon, and you know, so we as upwardly mobile intellectuals, etc., we would, you know, within the power game. See, we always say we were slaves, we'll be masters. The masters never do master-slave dialectic. You understand what I mean? So therefore, this thing may be the proper Erscheinungsform for that kind of subject. So one might, I mean, it would be almost impossible to read it like that. But technically, that's a much more interesting way of thinking about the phenomenology than as either chronology of historical development or Bildungsroman. That's what it wants to be. But in fact, as such, it stages normative deviations. So therefore, I give you, as this does not relate exactly to the relationship between Marx and Hegel, but I did what I could. I hope this last bit, although it is bigger than that, the topic chosen, I just sort of give to you because it's a hard one to think. You know, that's why I said I don't, and this I only thought last night. So, you know, it's a hard one to think. So I give it to you as something that I will certainly write about much more in detail very soon. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let me pick up where you ended to speak a little bit about the phenomenology of spirit, give you some thoughts about that, and then go to your theory of influence, which I think is fascinating, and maybe ask a few questions about that.
Wonderful.
I think that you're right. I mean, I think that what you were pointing to with regard to the way in which we read the phenomenology of spirit is the fact that there are these different passages that have played such an important and different role in people's readings, both of the phenomenology and of Hegel and of what to make of Hegel. And, you know, so you were just speaking about Malabou writing about the French tradition, de Beauvoir to Fanon, etc., and the reliance on the master.
Malabou didn't write about Fanon. I put in Fanon.
Okay. Well, Fanon is in there too. But in part, you know, that was a historical and odd product of the fact that the phenomenology was not translated until 39-41. And so the way that French intellectuals received it really was through Kojève's reading in the 1930s. It hadn't been translated into French in the 1930s when Kojève was giving his famous lectures that everybody was attending. And so there's a way in which that, since Kojève kind of turned everything on the master-slave dialectic,
Yes.
or the Lord Bondsman dialectic, more properly, but he called it the master-slave dialectic, and entrenching that.
More properly.
Right.
Not
Yes.
Lord Burns.
Yeah. Precisely. But maybe something about vassality, maybe something about something about feudal relations rather than slave relations. It's in some sense because of those translation issues and the fact that there wasn't a French translation that everybody kind of clustered around this Kojevian reading and emphasizing that part. But others then focus on other parts of the phenomenology. And in our Marcuse session, in our Marcuse seminar with Sheila Ben Habib, right, she was emphasizing the way in which Marcuse, in his early writings in 32, was focusing on the later part of chapter 4 from the phenomenology and the elements of sociality and how sociality was being formed. And one can see that fits with what you're saying, yes, right? Because it then becomes these different anchor points.
This would be the Erscheinungsform for Marcuse.
Right.
That's it. And people like him.
Yeah, exactly. And so different people are then focusing on different sections of the phenomenology to understand the phenomenon, or to relate, or to use, or to
say this is the best also.
Use.
This is the best because this is the best.
Right.
Well, this is the best.
It's a way to, in
they're
part
not
it's
saying it, but they're suggesting.
Yes, of course, because that's their entry.
Yeah.
That's what they can.
That's how
what
it is appearing to them.
Understand.
You see, I would emphasize to my students, always do it the other way.
Right.
That this is the Erscheinungsform, and they're turning it into Erfahrung.
Right.
That's the Erscheinung. Turn it into Erfahrung. That's phenomenology.
Right.
And you see that most strongly in whom? In a French guy, Sartre.
Right.
Because all of those North Africans, they were totally influenced by Sartre. Derrida, Memmi, you name it, across the board. Sartrean existentialism.
Well,
that's,
he was. Everybody was reading him. He was
because it was phenomenology.
Right.
So, in fact, the real push was, don't begin with, we didn't do that wonderful one on Anaxagoras species. It can't be done. Don't start with the noumenon and fixed definitions and so on and so forth. Start with the phenomenon. It appears. Erscheinungsform comes into light.
Yeah. Okay, so that makes sense of the idea that it's not a historical continuity that we're dealing with.
It's not a chronology.
It's not a chronology. Right. Okay. Now I do want to. So the radical proposition here today, I think, the radical idea here is this new theory of influence, which is something about haunting.
And something about how humanities teaches how to read. That is, the prayer to be haunted is how we read, not by controlling through close reading.
Okay.
Efface yourself as much as you can.
Okay.
Without emphasizing mastery, indifferent to mastery.
Okay.
That's a very feminist thing, by the way. Indifference to mastery.
I'm with you on that. I'm with you, and so. But the idea here, this is a theory of influence that really I think we're only going to apply it right now to Hegel's shadow haunting Marx.
Hegel haunting Marx, what shadow?
Hegel haunting Marx, yes, yeah. Hegel haunting Marx, yeah, fine, no shadow, okay. And so we can defer the question of whether that model of influence applies elsewhere. Let's stay focused for a second on Hegel haunting Marx. Now, okay, and so Hegel kind of, you said you had this idea of kind of Hegel forcing himself on the page.
Not forcing himself.
But inserting him. What is that? How is that?
Hegel so imposing what I might have said. How is one haunted? See, it's a concept metaphor. The reason why haunting is picked up here, the metaphorical logic is that it's unanticipatable.
Okay.
And you have to work hard for this haunting to happen. And another is...
Marx has to work hard.
Marx has to, you have to work hard also.
Okay.
And it's unanticipatable and it's non-periodic. You can't say, you know, anytime I sit down to read, I'm haunted.
No, yes, right. We have a different relationship to haunting than that.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
We don't even have a relationship.
No,
the relationship
yes, okay.
comes from outside.
Yeah, so I had said forces on the page, that's not it. It's kind of like imposes, okay. Marx was there's a psychological dimension to this theory.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's not so much psychological as epistemological.
Okay. And Marx was in some way, so Marx was always dealing with Hegel, confronting Hegel, and it was in that kind of constant confrontation.
No, Bernard,
that
it happens really best when you don't confront it.
Okay.
Because in the confronting it is, did Marx agree with these Hegelian principles?
Yeah, okay. Right.
Can I just say a word about that picture
hold on
gave?
for a second. Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Okay. You see that picture I gave?
Yes.
See, this is a haunting of a certain sort. See, when I go to, where's the picture? Okay, when I go to these, you know, for the last 42 years, I've been trying to produce subaltern intellectuals. I didn't do it a la Gramsci. Later, it came to me that I resonated with Gramsci. I went there. Okay, so this picture is taken I think this picture is taken, yes, in 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
2 or 3 weeks ago. So what happened was that this is a tribal area, right? And I have schools there, right? I train teachers, elementary schools. Now, they said again and again that, you know, I have sat down, they have no idea what the earth is or anything, because in their textbooks, the little round thing is earth. So they don't even know if no one teaches them anything, right? And so they say the earth goes down like a top. So what is going, nothing is going around like a top. So I kind of sit down with them and say, look, you will look and look and look and look. It'll never be round, right? But you just try to imagine that it's actually a huge ball. And then I show pictures from space, etc., etc. I do all of these things. And climate change, this and that, okay? And these are tribal teachers of mine, 3 wonderfully, very ill-educated, wonderfully smart, lovely people. So they have been telling me, sister, you should say this to the whole village. I mean, these are all illiterate, landless people. I mean, they've never... so the first time, I just totally kind of... I said, okay, since they asked, but I did a non-class. You see, I didn't teach anything. But then later, it seemed to me, hey, I have been trying to read them, learn how to teach, and it's coming from there. This is a serious thing. So the second time I said, okay, I'll do it. And that's that one. Okay. And I'll say something else. Oh, so I'm saying this, that, what will I say? These people have never gone to school. And I'm not talking to them about your rights and you know, et cetera, which is what people generally, the ruling class comes and talks about those things. I'm talking to them about earth and this and that. But nonetheless, you know, something's happening. And then the thing, I won't tell you everything that I said because that's how it happens. But one of these teachers, when I've finished, says, sister, tell them about the lungs of the world. She wants me to talk about the Amazon. the agriculturalization, because I had explained it to them in terms of how trees breathe, and so therefore we can breathe, and how the Amazon is in fact the lungs of the world. Now that's being haunted. You see, I had read them well enough that she came on me for me to say something. See, I mean, she totally had heard. I mean, you know, I had not expected them to be, and of course I showed them that, you know, like sundial-wise, that the earth does go round, because I'll put a stick in the place of where the sun is, you know, the sun on the ground. And then after an hour and a half we've talked, the sun has moved. I says, look, that's how far the earth has gone around while we've been talking. We've all gone around. See, trees, houses, all that much. So to an extent, I was trying so hard to read them, to see how they could be taught, you know, like the environment is my master. And something happened when they made me do this class, which really I thought would not work. And then right at the end, that woman says to me, tell them about the lungs of the earth. See, that was the moment of haunting. They don't have to be dead, and they don't have to be written words on a page, because that's also textual.
Right.
See what I mean?
Right.
I just wanted to say this to you, so that
Okay.
you don't think this is just a theory you apply. I'm against applying theories.
Right. Okay. Now, so the question I have, in a way, is on whether this theory of haunting depends on the other radical claim that you made at the beginning of the seminar, when you said that the phenomenology was a text to change the world. And so I think that's a particular interpretation.
Yeah, that's Pincard. I was quoting Pincard.
Okay.
Have I got Pincard? No.
I don't know.
I don't think
I
so.
have the other edition, which you don't like.
I don't think so.
But so I was wondering if it depends on that, in a sense, and in part because your reading of the philosophy of right.
I was trying to read like Marx quoting. Because it's an intertextual moment.
Yeah. But I mean, another reading of that passage in Hegel, in the philosophy of right, so, 15 years after the phenomenology, but the one on Hickrotus that we have in front of us, right, is very much to say that, you can be happy and you can dance when you find reason kind of
At the center of the rose.
Right. So the new way to think about it is not just, here is Rhodes, jump over it.
No,
but
it isn't.
But it's, here is the rose, dance thou here,
So,
right? Which is, he's playing on words, right? But it does turn into something where he's prepared to say here, to recognize reason as the rose in the cross of the present, and thereby to enjoy the present.
Wait a second.
Right, or your words, to enjoy to recognize reason.
Welche die Rose im Kreuz zu erkennen und damit dieser sich zu erfreuen. So, what would we say? Erfreuen? What would we say? Delight.
Delight.
Delight is what this translation says. Okay.
Enjoy, I think, is this one.
Okay.
To find delight in it, or to enjoy the present, is a rational insight which implies reconciliation with reality, right? So thereby to enjoy the present, that is the rational insight which reconciles us to the actual, the reconciliation which philosophy affords to those in whom there has once arisen an inner voice bidding them to comprehend, or this is a different translation.
Yes,
You know, but the point here is that, I mean, that seems very different than the idea that the phenomenology is a text to change the world. Or, I mean, that's a very different way of thinking about philosophy.
I wish, does anyone here have Pincard's translation, the Cambridge translation?
Does anyone have?
Because I should really know exactly what he says, because it's not something. But let me just say here something, okay?
Yes. Yeah.
If you look at this, it's he's talking about Geist. Huh?
Yeah.
So hier ist die Rose, hier tanze, was zwischen der Vernunft als selbstbewusstem Geiste. Vernunft belongs to the self-conscious Geist. Und der Vernunft als vorhandener Wirklichkeit liegt. And as Vernunft, available reality, I'm not looking at the translation, what that Vernunft, how that Vernunft is different from this Vernunft, and in ihr nicht die Befriedigung and cannot allow the finding of delight in that one. That is the Fessel irgendeines Abstraktums. That's not even is some abstraction. It doesn't translate. That is not which is not free. Which is not befreit zum Begriffe. It's really much more complicated than not free to be conceived. So it's really, he's talking here again about the difference between the Geist and the subject. So what can the subject do? The subject can't go to Vernunft. But if the subject can erkennen, not wissen, okay? So erkennen is the subject's way of knowing. And to be pleased with that, this reasonable insight is the Versöhnung, is the reconciliation with reality. So it really, this thing is all about Geist and subject. So I was trying to see how someone like Marx, who really admired Hegel's method, although he thought that Hegel was bound up by this Geist, how he might read this. I may be wrong, but you know, in my class, I tried to show also something that I had done with Mugi Watyama's Matigari, the last page of it. And I related, because we're rereading texts, etc. I related that page to something in a Bengali, very syncretic, subaltern poet of the 19th century, okay? And what I said at the end, and this I did, Mugi was a very dear friend of mine, and I did it at the memorial, right? And I said that, you know, this is a way of reading which may be incorrect, but see what you get out of it. So that's why, and this is hard, to be correct is not the goal. You know, it's because one has to acknowledge that one is contingent as a reader. You see, analytic philosophy can't do that. Analytic philosophy never questions the philosopher or try to historicize the philosopher or say the philosopher can only have this coming through. So that's why I may be wrong, but the thing is, to an extent, I want to excite the reader into what you just did, challenging and saying, no, it's right another way. Because then you are beginning to pray to be haunted, as it were. So, I mean, the text of teaching is not, it's that indifference to mastery.
Okay.
You know, that's what I'm saying.
I agree.
You can't teach everything like this.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the humanities. You can't
Yeah.
teach hard
Yeah.
science like this, I'm quite sure.
Yeah.
But everything else is production of knowledge. We teach how to, the practice of learning. That's why it's not application, it's practice. It's the practice of learning. You can practice, practice in an incorrect way and learn.
Right, but I think the question I'm trying to ask is, in a way, what are the stakes of reading Marx's relationship to Hegel as being one of haunting? And I was thinking that it works better if you think of Hegel as being someone who was interested in changing the world. In other words, when you get to
Did you find pin card?
thesis 11, and we think of, Marx talking about changing the world, Hegel as being almost possibly the foil there. But on this generous reading of the philosophy of right,
just this passage.
yes, this passage,
That
this
Marx
passage,
pushes us to, because of the hic rodus exalta. I mean, that's
Right.
an old theory of intertextuality, that when something is cited in a deep way, then the text is asking us to step beyond it into the other text.
right, right.
It's very old. I mean, footnote makers do this. They
Right.
see something, they go to it and document.
Right.
So it's very old. It's not something that I'm making up.
Right. But I take it that in the 18th of Brumaire, the idea you're suggesting is that when he's pointing back to the philosophy of right by using that quote, he's trying to suggest a more revolutionary reading of that passage.
No, I'm saying he's asking us to read that passage.
That's it.
And I will read it
Okay.
as I can read. See what I mean?
Okay.
And you will read it as you can read.
Okay.
This is phenomenology, turning appearance to experience. No, I'm not saying anything. What I'm saying about Marx reading is what I can say about Marx reading. I mean, I think of Marx as my brother. It's a way of thinking which comes from maybe academic feminism, like sisterhood, or maybe black language. Cornell was surely sitting here saying Brother Marx and Brother Hegel, no? Mm-hmm. So that it could be that too. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know where it comes from, but that's what I think, because it's also another way of not being a Marxist. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, and he's sitting mm-hmm. on my head. Mm-hmm, no, mm-hmm. He has to be changed. He belongs to history. So therefore I read like this. And you will read another way.
Okay.
And the two readings will enrich that intertextual moment rather than have a fight. Who's right? You can be right, I don't care.
No, that wasn't the idea, but yeah. Okay. We should open it up to questions if anyone wants to jump
ask
in.
A question,
I see one hand. Can you use the microphone?
Does this turn? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've never been in one of these with microphones.
Where are you?
Over here.
Here. Okay. So you are a graduate student or a teacher?
I'm a graduate student. I'm a PhD student in the history department. But I
In history, okay. Yeah, that's a teacher. I mean, the reason why I asked that question is because I'm totally a classroom teacher, and that's my model. That's my model of creating something which is the double bind between collective and individual. See what I mean? Carry on.
I have a question about the section from the 18th Brumaire that we spent so much time discussing about it was haunted by history. And when I read the passages that you asked us to look at, I thought kind of the metaphor travels a bit with the different.
You know, yes, I can't hear you properly because of the mic.
The metaphor travels a bit through the different parts that you assigned, right? It starts by saying that dead generations weigh like a nightmare on the brains of the living, and that the revolution in the 19th century kind of believes itself to be the revolution of the 18th century. And then we had this section that we read about how through failure, you're going to constitute a resistance to the world, resistance to understanding the world around you. You're going to constitute your time as a greater and greater enemy until that.
Where is that? You see, I don't want your. Yes, I don't want your summary of Marx. I want Marx's words.
Yeah. Then maybe this section. Revolution, such as those of the 18th
Yes,
century.
yes. What about it?
Okay. There's a section where he's talking about proletarian revolutions, however, such as those of the 19th century, constantly engage in self-criticism and in repeated interruptions of their own force. They return to what has apparently already been accomplished in order to begin the task again. With merciless thoroughness, they mock the inadequate, weak, and wretched aspects of their first attempt. They seem to throw their opponent to the ground, only to see him draw new strength from the earth and rise again before them, more colossal than ever. They shrink back again and again before the indeterminate immensity of their own goals, until the situation is created in which any retreat is impossible, and the conditions themselves cry out, take from the itself that here arose and here. And I was just
You have
thinking
the
about
German?
this passage while we're talking about the reconciliation passage from Hegel and the rose, and how there's a delight in kind of reason and thought coming together with reality. Whereas here, the image that we see being like one of resistance, and I wonder
Why? Where is resistance here?
because you're throwing it again over to the earth. Your opponent is thrown to the ground, and then he draws more strength and gets bigger, and then throws him to the ground.
Yes,
again.
but you know who cries out? The conditions cry out. See, this imperative, I'm glad you brought us forward here. This is the passage that I always cite, and you have the German, right?
No,
So-
I don't think we have the full German.
Do we have the German? No. So, you see, this particular position of imperatives. Imperatives, thank you. Imperatives always, thank you so much. Imperatives always come from the outside, okay? And it's not the inside, the conditions, and it's mistranslation. Remember what I was saying, that Verhältnis is, does anybody remember? If you don't, try to remember rather than just writing it down. Verhältnis, I mean, it will stand you in very good stead. In German classical philosophy, Verhältnis means the correct structural point, because everything is in terms of a structure, whereas Beziehung means just relationship. Okay, now here what it says, und die Verhältnisse selbst rufen. The correct structural moment calls out. It's not about the fight. This is, the Verhältnis is very much, bis die Situation geschaffen ist, until such a situation is made, die jede Umkehr unmöglich macht, which makes any turning away or around impossible. We are talking about the situation. That's phenomenology. I mean, Sartre will use it in French, situation. He wrote 10 volumes called Situation. So that's, and that calls out the Verhältnisse selbst, the structurally correct point itself, not cries out, roof and call. Hic rodus hic salta. So that's the German is much less agitated. It's much calmer. So therefore, thank you. Touch idea and the password. Okay, so that's what, and I'm very glad you brought us here, and I looked at what it really was. So you see, for the bürgerliche Revolutionen, they only have Katzenjammer, which they don't translate. Katzenjammer is a hangover. Okay, so how do they translate the Katzenjammer? They don't even translate it at all. Just after Sturm und Drang, So long period of regret. That's the Katzenjammer. So therefore, that bourgeois revolution is full of all of that, and the proletarian revolution, all it is it fails and it rises. It fails and it rises. So, bis die Situation geschaffen ist. Until this, why do they fall and rise? In order to create a situation. Until the situation is created. Where? The Verhältnisse. In other words, they reach the correct moment. And they rufen. Here is the
But I think this would be an interesting exercise right now, since there is no correct reading.
Or all readings are correct.
Yes, to actually hear some readings.
But wait a second, I want to contradict you, because if there is no correct reading, makes it look like the way deconstruction 50 years ago was put down. All readings are incorrect. No. All readings are correct.
No, they're all interpretations.
They're not interpretations. Yeah. That's Andy Fish. No. They are Erscheinungsformen. It's very hard to think this one. But try to think it. Don't reduce it to the words that we use all the time in order to make this kind of positive, negative judgment. It's not like you say they're all interpretations. There is some text which is right and we are just interpreting. It's not like that. Yeah. Because if it really is not noumenal, there is no noumenon.
Right.
All of those, it's all phenomena. Yeah. So any kind of metaphor that you would use, which pretends that there is a correct something or the other, you failed. You failed.
Yes.
You're not up to the task that has been assigned to you. It's not like you can't take a position.
Right.
You take a position very seriously, except it's an Erscheinungsform. It appears to me. Why? Because I'm devoted to Derrida. I translated his book and I was completely mishandled by all the whiteys because they would not let me come into the entourage. I mean, the way Jeffrey Bennington wrote about me in the LA Times, the way Vincent, whatever the hell his name is, I've forgotten his last name. So he said, Gayatri Spivak makes deconstruction right for the third world. And the third world, I've lived in this country for 64 years.
Right.
What third world? I live in the United States. I pay income tax here. I'm not third world, I'm colored. That's a very different thing from being third world. Third world is a civil society. So this, therefore, my Erscheinungsform is to say, don't say all readings are incorrect, because the echo is of Derrida bashing.
Yeah. No, I don't think, okay. Well, I get there through Nietzsche and Foucault, but I think we get to the same place, okay? And what I think would be interesting at this point would be to get to the place where we can hear of people's reading of this passage. In other words, what did you think that was going on when Marx goes to Harcourt right there?
I thought in some ways he was saying that one inherits consciousness, your consciousness of what you're doing is going to pass and you're trying to use it to understand the world around you, and you fail to change the world, and that criticizes you. That means you have to criticize your own consciousness of your time, and that actually transforms the problem that you face, because you've gone through this criticism, and then it's through this kind of incessant self-criticism, and also your wholehearted attempt to apply your ideas and your consciousness to a reality, which is inimical to it, that you create not only the desirability for change, but its possibility and even its necessity. And I thought that to me sounded in some way very similar to what we've been reading from Hegel about the reconciliation of thought and reality, or actuality and rationality, but that it was arrived at in this almost perverse way where you're constantly criticizing yourself, and there's a kind of real negativity, and the moment of reconciliation comes to you from outside.
But then why here's the rose dance here?
Here's the rose dance here. It's because that's when thought and reality come together. That is through the difference between thought and reality, between theory and practice, right? That kind of critical difference that one constitutes the possibility of actually reshaping the world according to human needs and according to what one believes the world ought to be, right? Here's the rose dance is, or take Delta is about, well, here is rose. Right, we changed the world. Here is the place that you've been looking for, and now you can do the thing you want to do. Right, as opposed to the kind of foolhardy, unself-conscious attempt to simply apply one's thought to the world without becoming conscious of how your ideas are actually given to you. They come from the past, they come from history, and you have to overcome actually the forms of consciousness that you've inherited.
I have a question. Who's the you?
I suppose here it would be the self-conscious proletariat. I mean, that's the idea of the proletarian revolution.
Right. So, what's the difference between you as the reader and the proletarian? Can you imagine a proletarian?
Can I imagine a proletarian?
Yes.
Oh, sure.
No, don't be so sure. You can, if you put a proletarian in this room, what would happen? I have written about those kinds of things. We are not, Marx himself was not a proletarian, and he was very awarely self-critical. He called himself a bourgeois ideologue. So therefore, whatever reading you give to it, you have to forget about everything I have said, because I think that's what you're being asked to do. Just read it as you read. That's fine. But nonetheless, one thing you must admit, that you must try to read it in terms of the characters who are being... It's not about you. I don't mean you, but some you. It's therefore, I mean, to imagine a proletarian of the 19th century is absolutely required in order to understand what should be done with this. This is not written so that an upwardly class mobile, as I said, intellectual can say what needs to be done. Absolutely keep that in mind. You must displace yourself into the text. This has nothing to do with what I was saying about phenomenology. That's very hard. Well, you don't do it in one session. I mean, as Wittgenstein said, you don't learn to play the piano in one session. And certainly phenomenology is harder than playing the piano. So you don't have to learn that one. But this, to be sure to see to whom, for whom, by whom something is said, that is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, it's a selfish reading. That's the problem of the... Walter Stoughton is not here, eh? Are you there, Walter? Ah, there you are. How I said that thing to you when we were talking on the Zoom. You know, I mean, Walter is one of the smartest students in my class, okay? and he happens to be, and he's blushing madly, he happens to be an undergraduate, but very smart. And I was not thinking as I was talking to him, because I was talking about this wanting to control constantly and turning everything into me. That's, in fact, what I was saying, that, you know, you were not imagining the thing. And I said, it's such a misfortune that your superpower culture just asks you to do nothing but control. And then we ended the meeting. I thought, why did I say this to this young man? I mean, I hardly know him. I've had only two classes. And I said to him that his culture was his fortune. Of course, I think so. But should I have said it? You know, so that's what I'm talking about. You know, try to do a little bit of self-examination in terms of why it is that you are. You see, one of these days, if I can get a moment with old Zoran, I will certainly tell him about education stuff, you know, this self-effacing education, because I'll tell him, of course I know him because he's Mahmoud's son, so I will tell him that in order, because some of the students that you're confronting come to my class, global, New York, wanting to save the world. And therefore, I want them to learn when they're children what I try to teach to my children in the so-called the largest democracy in the world. That is a joke. But nonetheless, so therefore, you know, you have to do a little bit of self-examination as you are. Don't be flattered. You know, I mean, I told you Walter is the best student. I mean, well, not the best now, but a wonderfully smart student in my class. That wasn't flattery. But otherwise, okay, carry on. But remember what I said. Don't turn it into something that was written only for you. Okay, come on.
Go ahead.
Here.
Yes.
Can't hear you.
Thank you so much. Actually, I am a classroom teacher.
Good.
Literature. And so I'm
Where?
in high school.
Where? Okay, don't give the name, but it really matters to me. Don't give the name. But because I think it's a much more important task to teach literature in a high school than to teach literature at this kind of a research one university where people are already very professionalized and very self-congratulatory. High school, they're still, I think this is a good thing. Okay, let me hear your question.
I mean, I really, when you're talking at clients in a way that I understand things on an intuitive level. A lot of philosophy students do a lot of philosophy.
I have never had a philosophy course, either undergraduate or graduate. I'm not a philosopher, can't philosophize.
I mean,
carry on.
beyond me, but I understand being confronted by the text and how it can change the world if you read the text in that particular way. And we struggle in classrooms because we have to teach close reading, especially if you're doing Brumaire and theology and all those great texts that we teach. We have to focus so much on, but we resist. We don't want the young people to be haunted by it because we want them to be right. So I understand that. But then I have a question which connects to what the lady on the other side was saying. It's a bigger question about changing the world. If we're just trying to understand, and if we let the text affect us in that way, what are we resisting? And if we're not resisting anything, how are we changing anything?
Okay. Yes, I will. I don't know if I understand. You will see if I have understood, right? So, you see, that's another thing, responsibility. If I can truly respond to you, then I have given you a responsible answer. So we'll see. You see, let's look at these texts here, okay, since this is a very important question. I don't think that it is possible to change the world. I think, therefore, I speak as a classroom teacher. I try extremely hard with my students. I'm not a particularly good teacher, but I'm a very sincere teacher. But I do not try to change the world. What I say is uncoercive rearrangement of desires, so that I make people want, if possible, want a different thing by shifting the way they want anyway. Okay, that's why I said forget phenomenology. So that's my own kind of thing. But in these texts, does Hegel in fact want to change the world? That is someone's intuition of Hegel. A man who has lived with Hegel all his life, much more than I have, because he translates Hegel. And translation is the most intimate act of reading. Even as, you see, I encourage translation as a teacher of comparative literature as an activity, not something to fall back on as a convenience. And so therefore, when he wrote, and unfortunately I didn't bring him, but his name is Pinkard, Pinkard. Therefore, that's the way the text appeared to him. So and you're asking, what are we doing? Remember, let's connect this to the text that we read. I don't think we are doing anything. You see, what we can do is we can act in such a way that we will hope that the Verhältnisse the real structural moment, will be hit by us. In Hegel, there are concepts of productive and non-productive contradictions, because the dialectic moves through contradictions, right? It's position, negation, negation, negation. So, but there can be contradictions which will not produce the dialectic. But so the correct contradiction, if one can, that's the shortening, and for Marx, it's the shortening of the working day. So in a sense, that task, and the funny thing is that you will not be able to do it on your own, thinking I'm producing, I'm changing the world. That's the problem. If you want to change the world, that's not necessarily something. I mean, I see all these NGOs just wanting to change the world in a most horrible way, which is why I will say to Zoran, teach the children a little bit differently. So it seems to me the idea that we will change the world is when Marx writes, Marx and Engels together, write the theses on Feuerbach. That's very early, and they are constantly changed, right? So it is a beautiful, thesis 11 is beautiful. But what does Marx say? Es kommt darauf an, sie zu verändern. This darauf ankommen is just like making it ready for the Verhältnis to call out, the Tanze here. So all we can do is, without knowing, try to create a position where it will be the correct contradiction that will say to us, okay, that's why I showed you that picture. Okay, so that particular thing, that the imperative comes when the Verhältnis calls you. All you have been doing is try to, you don't know that anything is going to happen. So I would say that whether we are changing the world, I want to say just one more thing. See, there was a guy who really kind of fell in love with me from a distance. When I was 15 years old, it was the very year that we went out for electoral education, 1957. It turns out that he became a major poet in Bengali, unbelievably major poet, wonderful poet. And his first book was a sonnet sequence dedicated to me. I had by then left, I didn't know him. So the thing is, it is not funny. The story is not funny at all. You know, it wasn't a question of falling in love. This was a major poet. And so he wrote, and I didn't know anything about this until much later. And then in one of his sonnets is in front of my desk in my office. And in that sonnet, he asks that Gayatri Chakravorty, who was not me, he asks that person to fail, that to how, and how to fail, and he says, open up like a shell. How do I open up like a shell? But why do you open up like a shell? So that seawater can enter, and salt and sand in their own speed perhaps will produce a pearl, perhaps not. How did he know in 1957 to write a poem like that that would match me as I grow into my 80s? That's a poet. But this idea that it will be something else that will perhaps create the pearl is an extraordinary idea. I should give it to you as a parallel to Marx's idea that the Verhältnis is going to call not you, but the proletarians if they act according to the task of getting up again and again, getting up again and again. It'll hit it. See, this is where also Lacan, in that essay that I mentioned the other day, the dialectics of desire and something of the subject, wonderful, best essay written by Lacan, that he says, you know, that the consciousness, ça, is like, I'm making this one up, like a bicycle chain, just going round and round and round and round. Suddenly something clicks and a signifier emerges. See, that's like, it's the same kind of metaphor. So don't try to change the world, but just try to do what you're doing well. See, Aristotle even says that. Just go on doing mimesis. Marx loved Aristotle. That's the poetry of the future. Just go on doing mimesis. Suddenly, perhaps by chance, suddenly a moment of poiesis will emerge. You won't know. That's why I mentioned the lungs of the world. You know, it's a surprise. So that's what, and Wittgenstein tells us that a Vorstellung will never give you a surprise, and especially if you think that a Vorstellung is the definition that you make in order to have a discussion. So this is a very different bag of beans, but it's a wonderful question. I used to talk to the Democratic Socialists of America when I was young enough for them to take me seriously. But I only talked to the high school the level ones. I wasn't interested in talking to the older ones. I would only go to the young people's meetings because it seemed to me that that was the crowd that I wanted to address. Anyway, sorry I took so long, but I was very excited by your question.
Yes, so I wanted to add a slightly different perspective, maybe, to this issue that you were discussing. And it goes back to the first text that you asked us to read, which is the postface to the second edition. And to this idea that for Marx, somehow, maybe what was haunting him was the idea that the dialectic in its unmystified form was in its very essence critical and revolutionary, right? Which is the end of that passage. In its mystified form, he said, right, the dialectic became the fashion in Germany because it seemed to transfigure and glorify what exists. So in its mystified form, it served a reactionary purpose. It served a conservative purpose of justifying the status quo, which is one of the possible readings, of course, of this hic rhodus, hic saltus, transformed into here's the rose, dance here, right? one possible reading of this is and it's perhaps the mystified form, is that in fact, be happy with what you have, right? Because it's rational in part, and maybe because the state is rational, or there are rational elements to the state. So be happy. And one reading is that mystified form is precisely that reading of the passage from the philosophy of right. But the one that I take it that Marx wants to give it is its rational form. So the rational kernel within the chaff, within the mystical shell that you get rid of. And when you get rid of the mysticism, you have this, what he's suggesting here is it's an abomination to the bourgeoisie, right? And its doctrinaire professors. I think it says spokesman here, but I think it might be professors in
Could
the
be, I
German.
don't have the German.
Do
the
we
German?
have the German? Hold on. Yeah,
we
it's
have the
mystified
German?
dialect. Yeah, Umspulen. We don't have the second page, I think. It
No,
would be
that's what we
28.
didn't have.
28,
yes.
page 28. If somebody had the page 28, I don't know if you.
Do you have anyone?
I don't
anyone
have it right here. We have page
103
27.
of postface to the second edition?
But anyway, I know that the other English translation is professors, which was striking to me here,
Yes.
spokesman. But in any way, continuing here, because it regards every historical development form as being in a fluid state, in motion, this notion of motion, right? This notion of motion, which is what Lenin picks up on in his conspectus, this idea of movement, of motion. And that leads us ultimately, because it does not let itself be impressed by anything, being in its very essence critical and revolutionary. So, if you think modestly about wanting to change the world, modestly, not thinking that you're going to achieve it, but striving for that, or maintaining that ambition, knowing that you fail, but keeping on trying all the time. I mean, one reading of this postface is that, Marx was turning to Hegel, or rereading Hegel, or making us read Hegel, in part because he felt that the dialectic was revolutionary, right? And causes movement, motion, change. So,
Where is the German? You found? Yeah. Because movement here is not, emotion is not necessary. It's Bewegung, right? Where? Here. Yes, Flusse der Bewegung. Form and Bewegung, these are so much part of the phenomenological vocabulary. It's not, Bewegung is movement, that's not change. That's the way in which the Wissenschaft and the Geist moves. And that's what Hegel, even when he's writing in a mystified manner, even then, he is the first to present its general forms of motion, once again, Bewegung. So I'm just contributing that as a thing. I think your reading is excellent, but the motion is not revolution. The motion is Bewegung of the whatever you call the Marx will not say Geist. Marx will say the first to present its general forms of the dialectic. The dialectic moves. That's not revolution. What does he say about Glücks Revolution durch nichts imponieren lässt, ihrem Wesen nach kritisch und revolutionär ist, according to its essence, right? not being in
So,
a
so how? What's the original German for? Because it regards every historically developed form as being in a fluid state,
because
in motion.
okay, again, because it's why do you make it go so quickly? Jede gewordene Form. That doesn't say historical. The gewordene, once again, what happened to Lena? Did Lena leave? Lena was behind you, right? Lena, you've left, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, because she's the native German speaker in my class. So and she really.
You guys really, are native Germans too.
Really, yes, but they're not in my class. I don't know them. So I mean, anybody, I think I read Derrida better than many native French speakers. So on the other hand, there are native French speakers, or Heidegger, than many native German speakers. So, but there are native speakers who are much better than I. So that's the whole thing. Okay, so here he's not saying historically, jede gewordene Form. And das gewordene is a very strange word, and werden is a very strange word in German. It's like Bengali has no is, okay? And because, of course, everybody, they don't know how to think that. So they will translate this is as a hoy. And so my teachers, there's an English sentence with an is, they're putting in a hoy. And I say, there's no is in Bengali, you have to think that. So this werden is a bit like that, right?
Let me just look at it for a second here.
So, gewordene is not historical.
Yeah.
What is it?
But what we can agree on is that it says kritische und revolutionäre.
Oh yeah, that of course, but not fluid form or anything.
Fine. We can have another.
And your reading is a very good reading. I'm not contradicting your reading.
I know.
The only thing that I want everybody to be aware of is that the English translation is not faithful to Marx. And this is not a problem with the translator. All languages are untranslatable, and it is necessary to translate all of them. First thing that happens when you translate is you kill the sound of the language. The phonic existence of the language is how the language exists. And that is murdered once you translate. So, as I said before, you should translate as an activity, as Bernard and I are both translating. Do you see that? As an activity, but not as a convenience, that this is adequate to you wouldn't feel like that if the mother tongue were your own. You won't feel like that about someone who reads Shakespeare only in Chinese. No. So, because it's your mother tongue. And so this is something that you should keep in mind. There's nothing wrong with translation, because translation is impossible, but necessary. So that's all. Okay, carry on.
Just to conclude then on that, the only thing I would say though is that the Dialektik ist kritisch und revolutionär. Sorry for the French accent, but yeah.
So what about it?
That's a. It's a slightly different. It's a slightly different. It's a slightly different.
No, you forgot something. These people are philosophers. You see, what do you do here? This, yes. He says, the ihrem Wesen nach, in its essence, and the Wesen is what is in the Geist, etc., etc. Jede gewordene Form im Flusse der Bewegung, in the flow of movement, thus also grasped in their past place, according to its essence, will be is critical and revolutionary. One has to. I mean, I have nothing against your reading. I think it's a very moving reading, and it's very good to think of the dialectic as critical and revolutionary. But if you're looking at the way it's put, it reminds me of, I come from an intellectual left kind of place. I'm a West Bengali, Arab Bengali. It's a second international intellectual left, really rather awful. But I mean, anyone in Calcutta who is anyone, I mean, they have to be, they are not any longer, but when I was growing up, had to be communists. I mean, it was just that. And so the thing is, when we felt that someone was really not cool and not really doing anything correctly, we would say, not dialectical. So this is so I know what Bernard is talking about. But the thing is, and very much later when we realized that that was perhaps a bit funny, we would say, well, lumpen. So these words coming from a wretched socialist past, also cling when we listen to this. It's good to think of the dialectic as critical and revolutionary. But if you're reading this thing, then you should read that, and especially if you're reading it in German. So ihrem Wesen nach. And if we had gone into species being and species life, and there is no Wesen there, the Gattungsleben, and in the other one is Gattungswesen. So that the word Wesen is not immediately available to the Vorstellung making subject. So keep that in mind. That's what there is in the here. Essentially, doesn't give you anything. In its very essence, it says. Well, in its very essence, sounds like a just a formal little word, little phrase. Absolutely, it means. In its very essence, it's absolutely, truly something like that in English. But these people are writing in a philosophical language where each word has been loaded with a value. It's a Kant, Hegel, classical German philosophy, Marx himself. It's really a value-laden use of language. And this is what I was writing in one piece that everyone has read, Can the Subaltern Speak? This is what I was writing, that when Foucault and Deleuze are talking to each other, they forget, and they only talk in French, and they're talking about Marx, but they've forgotten that in German, the word has two, Darstellung, Vertretung, proxy and portrait. And there's also Repräsentation. And there are three different meanings. And they're just using the French word représentation. So that's what I'm saying, It's when you go into the German text, then you will see each word is laden with something. And it's a great feeling. I mean, every Sunday we have our little Hegel reading group. And, sometimes it's so fun because I was taught Hegel by wonderful people, right? I mean, Deman taught me Hegel. And then, so I couldn't understand anything, but I took good notes. And then in 2.5 years, it slowly came into being in my head. And so sometimes, because I'm so influenced by all of this, as we're reading, I will say something, and then we'll see that the next sentence says it. And then I say, you see, this, what happens when good teachers teach you something. So that's what I'm trying to say. Lay yourself out into Hegel's space and try to imagine how he's using, and Marx, how they're using these words. Value-laden, like in novels. In novels you have characters who, like Cordelia, she says nothing. She says nothing, and doesn't speak. And yet she's the most important person in the play. How does that happen? Shakespeare knows how to give value to someone who says very little. That's why he's a good playwright. So, you know, I mean, I'm being really trashed by Columbia upper administration. I won't go into it, but very badly trashed. But I was telling my friend, you know, Shakespeare helps me. Because Shakespeare has that line where Lear has been kicked out and he says to the fool that if you go into, if a farmer has a guard dog and there's a human person, a beggar, walking by, the dog barks and the human runs off. And then Shakespeare's extraordinary sentence, a dog's obeyed in office. You put a dog in an official position, like the upper administration, and you have to obey them. A dog's obeyed in office. That's how Shakespeare consoled me as I was being kicked around by the... So you see, how does that happen? Because of values systems that the playwrights or the novelists, and that's how German classical philosophy is written. And so we really, I mean, and French existentialism also tries to go there, and that's why those of you who were in my old class, Diva's left, will remember that Sartre scolded Memmi, saying Memmi forgot the system and he turned the system into a situation. No, Memmi did a wonderful thing. I mean, this was a good thing. But this idea, you know, that in the French there was a situation which was flexible and the system which was somewhere else, that's different from what we're looking at here. But so I just would leave you with that one. Try to remember, even if you will never learn German and you will just read the wretched English, you try to remember that it is, Walter is still there, it is a misfortune that in this global English situation, I love English. I learned it as a foreign language, I teach it. But on the other hand, in this global English situation, people thinking that God spoke in English, it's a misfortune. So therefore, just remember, if you're reading it in English, that there is something behind it, which is throbbing with a completely different completely different way of using the words. That's German classical philosophy. That it teaches you, as you're reading it, how to read these words. They are all teaching texts. So that's what I would say about the word Wesen there. Okay. Otherwise, all readings are correct. They're Erscheinungsform to... you can change the world by changing laws, which is why I respect Bernard so very much about capital punishment. That is, laws are a way of changing the world. But law is not justice. You change laws, you don't change minds. So that also one should remember. On the other hand, you put yourself in hell trying to change laws. So, you know, one has to respect that. That is changing the world. But nonetheless, you know, one has also to remember this limit. I mean, the caste system has been abolished. They should go into the villages to see that good people, you know, I'm upper caste obviously, good people are actually on my drinking water. I was not noticing, drinking water from my dirty sneakers. Why? Because their daughter is going to have an operation. That's the caste system. Laws were changed, but not minds. You know, and she's not oppressing anyone. She's just oppressing me by worshipping me while I'm talking to someone else. Suddenly I look down and I see she's sitting, she's kneeling there drinking water from my dirty sneakers. I say, what are you doing? And she says, my granddaughter is going to have an operation, sister. So I'm taking water from your feet to have good luck. Imagine that. You change laws. This is not oppression. She believes this. She's a good person, and I mean, I behave as if I'm her equal. I eat with her. I sleep in the same room, these strange rooms where people say, how on earth do you live there? You know, little adobe huts. But that doesn't do anything. It's absolutely ingrained. You know, I take a tomato from someone's plate and eat. Everybody's shocked. You know, 75 seconds. There is absolute shock there. I've been living with these people for 20 years. What happened? Well, a Brahmin took from my eaten food plate. I have sinned. That guy has sinned because I took the tomato. You understand? So this is, you change laws, you don't change minds. And so that is something that also one, and the changing mind stuff comes for the humanities teacher, you know, so that one can desire the law. They already knew it in the European 18th century, that you must, Kant knew it, you must desire the law. You see, that's what I said, that's what I said. It's not a bad thing to try to do, you know, it's a, and to say this to people who have nothing, like those pictures I showed you, to desire the law when the law oppresses them, it's a hard task, but that's how I would put it.
Well, I could continue all night, and I have to teach in this room tomorrow morning.
So just
capital punishment.
Let's carry on.
So we could go till not tomorrow morning.
I would love to
You'd love
hear
to?
you teach capital punishment. That is, I mean, you're a hero. So,
Do you want to stop? Do you want to keep on going?
what do you say?
What do you say?
It's up to you. Because you see, I am so full of adrenaline that, and I'm having a good time. I mean, this is the only good time I have because I'm so old that most people think I'm invisible. I'm 84 years old. So the only place where people actually take me seriously is in a classroom. So therefore, this is for me like going on a cruise. you know what I mean? So if you really are serious and wise people, you should leave. But if you ask me, I can stay here forever. You know? So.
All right. Well, let's do this. I'm ready to stay here all night. So anyone else who wants to stay here all night, we can continue in a small group. But in the meantime, maybe we should thank you.
Absolutely.
And
these are very good questions.
all right. And thank you all for coming out this evening. So next week we'll be meeting with Judith Butler, and we'll be actually at Riverside Church, at the Riverside Church. Okay, so see you next Wednesday over there. All right, we're doing kind of Judith Butler on Hegel.
She knows Hegel.
Yeah.
She knows Hegel in her analytic way. I mean, she wrote a dissertation on Hegel.